we're going to jump right into our first topic here. And very first topic is about building housing around BART. So currently there's about 23 stations out of 45 BART stations here in the Bay Area that do not have any housing. And so BART owns quite a bit of land. And one of the ideas is, why don't we just build additional housing right near BART? It makes sense. It allows high density populations to have quick access to public transportation.
Yeah, it's an amazing idea. And not only could they build housing right around BART stations, it would alleviate people having to have cars, which is what a lot of cities are like moving towards, just reducing the amount of actual available parking to discourage more cars being purchased.
And not a surprise, we've got the NIMBYs, the people that are not in my backyard. And they are now already opposed to building additional housing. And we keep going back to the same problem, the same topics over and over again, to where if we want to solve the housing crisis, we have to build additional housing. And the fact is, NIMBYs do not help.
No, they do not help. And if it's not readily apparent, we don't actually like NIMBYs that much.
No, we don't.
I think they stop progress. And this is just another one of the examples of slowing down progress that is actually needed and would do a tremendous amount of good for the community and the infrastructure and just traffic all around in the Bay Area altogether.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, going back to a couple of surveys that they've done this year and last year, one of the biggest complaints that people have, or at least who they blame for the housing crisis, are developers. But developers want to develop. They're literally in the business to develop. That's
right.
Why they're called developers. And so BART has the opportunity to build additional housing. And it's such a great idea that I think it's a no-brainer, but we keep going back to this issue.
A couple of things, for example, that as I was reading the article, that I think that BART probably needs to implement into their plan. And this is something very similar to what a lot of cities did, namely Emeryville, which then a lot of other cities followed suit, is that when they entitle land, they entitle it with the intent of expediting the process and then handing it over to an actual developer. Keep in mind, BART is in the business of rapid transit, right, and mass transit. So they're not necessarily
not really rapid transit these days, though.
Not exactly. Not necessarily. Well, it's rapid transit for the Bay Area, right? It's Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's the actual acronym for BART. And so they're in the transportation business. So they're not necessarily going to know the ins and outs of dealing with NIMBYs on property that they themselves own. So when you talk about different cities like Emeryville, what they did in the past to encourage a lot of growth was they fast-tracked the entitlement of specific land, and then they made it easily available to a developer who could then turn around and pick it up. They even made different incentives and to collect additional fees while still making the acquisition cost of the newly entitled or expedited the entitled land available to a developer. And that's really what BART also needs to do, because, for example, what I was reading into this is that BART themselves would be the developer, probably using a lot of the retirement fund that things like Caltrans has as equity to do this. But again, they just lack the expertise to do that. And then we also know just from watching from afar how they've managed their actual finances with BART and the building and expansion of the whole Bay Area rail system.
Now,
they haven't done the best job.
Yeah, one of the biggest arguments against this is the fact that it would eliminate all the parking available at BART, or maybe not all of it, but most of the parking. But the reality is there's a lot of people that make it to BART by walking, bicycle, or they literally take Uber and Lyft to the BART station and then BART where they have to go. More and more people are wanting to live near BART stations, near public transportations, because they don't have a car. And when you have and it's one of those trade-offs where you eliminate a car, and then that car payment goes basically toward paying your rent to live near a BART station. And I can't tell you how many apartment buildings. One of the strategies used by landlords in Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco, and rent control cities to somewhat get around rent control is to charge separately for parking, because parking spaces are not subject to rent control. However, that's now lately been backfiring because simply tenants do not have cars anymore. I have a 15-unit building right by Ashby Bart where we have 10 out of 15 parking spots available because tenants in that building simply just don't have cars and are not interested in paying for the parking
Just to
fee.
kind of close the idea of the parking, I'm actually developing a property 4 blocks away from the BART station in El Cerrito, and it's a 55-unit apartment complex. And this is not BART-owned property, but it falls under the EIR of El Cerrito, where they increase the density of zoning for specific property or land to be redeveloped that was within a 4-block radius of its existing BART station in El Cerrito. And in that particular instance, one of the things that they allowed was to underpark the building. So you have a 55-unit apartment building, but we're only going to provide 25 apartment spaces because our demographic are going to be people who don't have cars. And in fact, that is a largely growing demographic where people are just not getting a car and they're doing the Uber thing, or they're parking themselves, they're living right next to rapid transit. So this is a real audience and a target market that actually is going to probably be the model for the Bay Area in years to come. It's just that you have this resistance from places like or NIMBYs.
Okay,